Yeah, all right, cool. All right, are we live?
We are.
Just give it an extra few minutes. Some more people to turn up.
Cool. Hope everyone is being safe out there and using the time that working from home to watch build as well. Or maybe not, otherwise I'm not going to have that many news.
Maybe just lots of Netflix.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, it's especially if build's free and you can go and watch the repeats anytime. I have enjoyed the fact that there's repeats. You know, in the scheduler it says if you can't watch it at 2 a.m., here's a repeat at sort of 9 a.m. the next morning. That's been really helpful.
Yeah. But in the end, we actually use that to say, okay, instead of just watching 10, now you're going to watch 20, right? Because you're watching the ones in the like in the wee hours. Then after that, you watch the ones that you miss on that time on the repeats.
Ah, it's good time to be locked in, right?
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm. One thing that I found really good on those repeats and kind of a trick is when you go to the repeats, especially for the ones that is focus groups or stuff like that, there is less people there. Everyone tries to flock to the first one. Then you have more chance to actually talk to the product group and things. So the repeats in this case is not that bad.
Mm. True. Okay, so we're going to give it a couple more minutes and then we'll kick off at say time.
Yeah, we'll give it till 25 till or something.
Yeah, sweet. This is our first virtual event, so first team's live. It's a bit of a learning experience for us all, although we have practiced.
We have practiced.
Of course, this event is also being recorded, so we can also chuck that on the Auckland Azure YouTube channel.
Nice.
This is probably the first event that we've recorded that hasn't been recorded by Daryl. Daryl Webster.
It is. Yeah.
What are we going to do? We've turned Daryl into a robot. Yeah.
Daryl is a recording, not service.
Yeah, Daryl on it as a service. All right. And it's about dinner time for everyone, so I'm hoping everyone's sort of thinking about pizza and has potentially ordered a pizza to show up right in the middle of this.
Oh, damn it.
That is the one thing we're all missing.
Having said that, to be able to join today, I was preparing dinner at the lunchtime. So it's everything set up for the kids, and then I could be here. Otherwise, I would be multitask literally right now.
Yeah.
And yesterday I was in a meeting around that time, and I have to mute every 5 minutes because angry kids or hangry kids are not fun, man. Now they're all fed and nice and watching Netflix.
Oh, we got a couple of couple of messages in.
Oh yeah. Oh yes. We'll kick off. Seeing as
Just go back on that one.
We are talking, but not publishing. We didn't put our cameras yet out.
Buddy's now on. We might as well kick off, so I'll leave it to you, buddy.
Cool, nice one. All right, well, yeah, let's get into it. I think we've got a bunch of people on, which is cool. Yeah, so I guess first up, we just kind of want to say welcome to everyone. It's cool to be back, and we hope that you've all been keeping safe over the last few months during this lockdown period. Like I say, I think we're all pretty stoked to kind of be back to doing some form of community event, albeit, you know, in a bit of a new way. So, you know, it does mean that, to Dan's point a minute ago, unfortunately, the normal networking with pizza and beers is going to have to wait until we're back in person. But yeah, you know, such as life. I guess if only there was that delivery service where you could order one slice of pizza and a bottle of beer and send it out to all of you. That'd be pretty cool. But yeah, on the topic of I guess the changes of the format, actually, there's just a couple of, I guess, housekeeping things. So as you can probably tell, we're leveraging Teams live events as a way to reach all of you guys, which is it's pretty awesome, and we are pretty new to it. So there's a couple of things just to keep in mind. There's no attendee audio, so we can't hear you guys. That said, there is a Q&A which a bunch of you are using already. I think someone just mentioned about my hat. Thanks. Yeah, and at the end, I guess on the topic of kind of format and technology, we've got a little, I guess, feedback form. So yeah, just if you could fill it out, give us your feedback on how the experience was for you guys. Just so that we can make it better for next time, and you know, understand what we need to improve. That'll be awesome. Cool. So you probably all know we've timed this, I guess, kind of first session back to coincide with Build, hence the name. So for those of you that don't know, and I'm sure most of you do know, Build is one of the many annual conferences that Microsoft run for engineers and developers alike. So yeah, I think it kicked off yesterday, New Zealand time. So the last few days there's been a ton of content across all the platforms. So, you know, Azure, Dynamics 365, Microsoft 365, and it's normally an in-person event as well. So, you know, I guess with that they've had to make it digital, which is pretty awesome, because I would imagine a lot of us don't get to go to something like Build, with it being primarily run in the States. So I guess that's one good thing that COVID has given us. Yeah, and so some of the agenda items that we've got, I just want to cover off in a minute. I'll just talk about a couple of other sessions that are going on in the community over the coming weeks, and then we've got, obviously, you know, like I say, heaps of Build content. So people on here as presenters, so Rory, Dave, Dan, Aben and Wagner, they've all got a chunk of kind of new news that you may have missed out on over the last few months, and like I say, a couple of days of Build that they'll share with you as well. So yeah, we've got heaps and heaps to get through, which is pretty cool. So the first event that's coming up, I think it's, yes, here we go. So the Auckland Connected Systems user group, they've got an online event next week, next Tuesday, the May 26th. So Tiago and Michael are going to be diving into a whole bunch of virtual network integration with Azure Functions, so a whole bunch of content around that, and some demos around private site access and the like. So this one will be pretty awesome, and I think yeah, we were just talking a minute ago, there's a bunch of people signed up to come along. So yeah, don't miss it if you haven't heard about it already. And then we've also got one that Dan can probably talk a little bit to, which is the ISV chats.
Yeah, so hopefully you can hear me. But this is my team, the team I'm working at Microsoft. We look after independent software vendors, and we kind of wanted to share a bit about what technology ISVs in New Zealand are building using. You know, we've got some cool stuff happening with Service Fabric and Kubernetes and that sort of stuff. So we put together, we were going to run a day full of technology, but that's not going to happen. So we've got this ISV chats, which is an open free webinar series we're running. We've got sort of some international speakers like Abel Wang coming and talking and sharing their view on building software in Azure. So there'll be a bunch of free content. So you can head over and the ACA MS ISV chats and just go and sign up and get that free. It's just on-demand video, but there'll be some interesting stuff, especially if you know people working in the industry.
Cool. All right. And we just had a question come through around who's on as presenters. So what I'll do is I'll actually just I'll do a quick whip round, and you can each wave and say hello. So I'll just start with sending Dave live real quick. Oh no, he's muted.
There we go.
Cool.
Meeting etiquette got the best of me. Cool.
Yeah.
Yep. So I'm just going to be doing a quick spin on the new data center that's been announced.
Ooh, nice one. Cheers. And we've got Aben.
Hey guys, so I'm taking a bit of a spin around the routing and networking today. And I'm also going to show you guys a quick video on Visual Studio Codespaces and talk about a supercomputer.
Awesome, I like it. And we have Rory.
Hi, yeah, I'll be talking about identity as normal. A lot of stuff that's happened and some really cool stuff that was announced at Build.
Nice. The only guy worth talking about identity, for sure. Wagner.
Hey everyone. So as usual, I'm going to be talking about all the news about around Azure integration services. So Logic Apps, Service Bus, Event Grid, and API management. There is a lot to cover on that.
Cool. And you've already heard from myself, but I'll just throw Dan up on there as well so he can say hello. And he's muted as well.
Rookie mistake. I mean, how could I do that? I'm sure, like the rest of us, we're all on Teams all day, so this is not the first mistake. Yeah, I'll be talking about Private Link, Cosmos DB, Kubernetes, a bunch of stuff like that. Anything that I found awesome at Build, which was a long list.
Cool. Dan's also in charge of the slide deck as well, so if there's any mishaps there, then it's on him. All right. So yeah, without further ado, we'll kind of get into it. I think first up we have Rory.
Yeah, hi. It's good to be back with the user group. It's taken us a bit of time to get it all sorted, but here we are. So I'm a Microsoft Identity Architect, and I'm also an MVP in the enterprise mobility space. You can hit me up on Twitter if you've got any questions, and I've got a blog up on Medium called The New Control Plane. That's because Microsoft have a saying that identity is the new control plane. And next slide, please. So way back at the beginning, before COVID kind of really got started and before we all went to lockdown, this article appeared by Microsoft, who's like saying, you know, you're probably going to be needing to go and work remotely. And so their top tips right then were to use a common collaboration tool like Microsoft Teams. And I think what COVID's done is really established that. It's got over 72 million users at the moment. Basically use conditional access so that your users can access cloud apps from outside of your network. Use the Azure AD App proxy so you can get to on-premises apps, kind of like a thing that goes through the firewall. Obviously collaborate with B2B and use Intune to make your devices, your BYO devices, really safe, and you know that only registered devices can get through the corporate firewalls and things. And like when you look at that now, I just wonder how many companies have scrambled to put that stuff together so that they could actually, you know, work during the lockdown. Next slide, please. Okay, so some things that have been happening. So firstly, is a new feature called first line workers. So a lot of workers work in like a warehouse or something, and they have a whole lot of different customers, and each customer has a different app. So it becomes really hard to have multiple logins for multiple customers. So what this does is you've got the mobile and you log in with your phone number, because that phone number is yours, right? It's constant no matter who your customer is. So you've got an SMS phone number, it's entered into the system. When you log in, you put in your phone number, it sends the OTP back, you acknowledge that, and then you can get into whatever app you happen to be working on for that shift. The next time you come, it might be a different customer. Obviously, if it's for a big thing like the warehouse, their help desk doesn't want to get 1 million people complaining from the first line workers. So you can delegate the user management for the first line workers with my staff. So you can say someone in that warehouse can onboard the people, password reset, help them, and all that kind of thing. Now there might be different apps that the company's using. There's a real pain at the end to go and sign out of all of them. So basically there's one button at the end. You click that, it signs you out of everything. Put down the mobile, you go off shift, the next guy comes in and signs it with their phone number, and so you go on. So really cool approach for people that work across multiple companies and you don't want to have an identity everywhere. Next slide. Okay, so we've got new tools to block legacy app authentication, and that's the kind of rise of the app proxy. So basically the proxy will let you do header authentication, Kerberos authentication, password copying, all those kind of things that for applications that don't use modern authentication. So applications that don't use OpenID Connect. Microsoft did a survey and basically found 99% of the spray attacks, they target the legacies. Credential stuffing is legacy. And basically what Microsoft found when they implemented this, they found that they were getting something like 100,000 hits a month that they hadn't been aware of for people targeting legacy stuff that had been turned off. So definitely worthwhile to think about that. Next slide. Okay, so zero trust, that is a very big thing at the moment. Zero trust is basically assume that, don't trust nobody. So use conditional access, make sure your IP addresses are safe, give everyone the least privilege possible, and assume that someone has already breached you. So in other words, make sure everything's encrypted and so on. Now they have a very nice tool that basically goes and looks at your Azure tenant and assesses the maturity of your zero trust in your company, and then gives you a whole lot of hints as to how you can get better and basically get a really mature zero trust model. Because now with software as a service, with IoT and all those kind of things, you can't protect the perimeter like we used to do with a firewall, because where is the perimeter? If you've got 10,000 IoT devices, that can't be in your perimeter. Okay, next slide. Next slide. Okay, also, some of you may have seen conditional access report only. So report only is you set conditional access, but you don't make it active. You basically just put it on to see what's going to happen. That report only node has now got a whole lot of insights and reporting and troubleshooting. So there's this really nice report that comes out and it tells you who's used that conditional access policy, whether they succeeded, why they didn't succeed, and then on the right hand side it basically tells you where they passed and where they failed. So basically you can turn on the policy, you can go through and say, hey, well, everyone from Dunedin can't get in. Why is that? Oh, okay, that's because we haven't got that region sorted. So you can basically sort out all the problems before you turn on the conditional access, which is pretty cool stuff. Okay, next slide. All right, so now we get to build. So a lot of announcements at build, and I was up at 3 o'clock yesterday and at 5:30 today to try and catch all this stuff. So in the identity world, MCell, which is the identity library for Angular, is now GA. We've now got a new library called Microsoft Identity Web, and that is basically the glue between ASP.NET applications and the MCell library. So it makes it even easier to use the MCell libraries. There's an integration assistant. So basically, before there was a little checklist that you had to go and manually tick off to make your app secure. Now it's built into app registrations, just like that report that you saw for conditional access report only. And it basically gives you the things, using implicit flow, that's not a good idea. Using a client secret, consider using a certificate, and so on. Quite often you see apps, if you're an admin, someone says you have to consent. You want to know, is that app actually from your company? So if you're a member of the Microsoft Partner Network, you can get your apps verified. And then when it comes up with a consent screen, it's got a little blue box with a tick. And so you can say, cool, that's my company's app. I have no problems doing that. And something that's really cool is Azure AD external identities. So we know we've got Azure AD, and that's for corporate customers, and we've got Azure AD B2C, that is for, you know, customers of an organization. But there's quite a lot of use cases that are in the middle. So one of the things that people have been asking for a long time is self-registration in Azure AD, which you can't do at the moment. Obviously, someone's got to do it inside the portal for you, or you have to write an app yourself that uses the Graph API. So what this does is you basically set that up, and then what happens is you're in Azure AD screen, and then suddenly you leap across to a B2C screen, and then in the B2C screen you're doing the external registration. You can set up the user flow, sign up, sign in, password reset, profile edit. You can do all that stuff inside of Azure. It seamlessly integrates between Azure, B2C, and back to Azure. So that's really cool, because it's like the two coming together. They've always been quite separate. So I've got quite a lot of customers that have been asking for that. Okay, next slide. Okay, a whole lot more identity graph APIs have come out. So you can basically use DevOps across the user flows and policies. You can do it for device registration, phone and password. So in B2C, you can now log in with a phone number. We've got some clients in the South Island who drive around with delivering the cattle. Some of those guys don't have email addresses, so you know the fact that they can log in with their phone number is really cool. Password protection APIs and a whole lot of identity protection APIs, so you can really start monitoring what's happening across your network. Two other things to call out: the Microsoft Graph Toolkit. So I really recommend you have a look at that. Basically, you write one line of JSON, so you of JavaScript, sorry, and you go basically mgt- login, and through the toolkit it pops up a login button, and then you say mgt- calendar, and it suddenly pops up the calendar. It can pop up your schedule, it can pop up profiles of people, literally with one line of JavaScript. It is really cool. I recommend you go and have a look at that. Windows Terminal has come out finally, 1.0. Go and have a look at Windows Terminal. It's a free download. Basically, it's a terminal that gives you a lot of different tabs. You can have PowerShell in one tab, you can Bash in another tab, you can have Unix in another tab. It does all kinds of stuff. You can have the color schemes and everything you want. You can put graphics into it. Really, really cool. So go and have a look at that. And then those of you that remember SETI, where you basically donated your computer time to trying to find out if there was life in the universe. Well, with all the COVID stuff, they've announced folding at home. So you can basically go and log on at that website, and you can donate your CPU time to try and help solve the problems with COVID and do different kind of simulations. So if you're interested in that, go and have a look. Okay, so the next slide is going to be some questions. So basically, please just put Q1, Q2, or Q3 in the answer. So the first people who get the right answer, I've got some JetBrains vouchers to give away. So JetBrains do ReSharper and a whole lot of other stuff. So question one is what, and I spoke about this.
I was going to say, Rory, as well, yep. We've got some T-shirts to give away as well. Okay. So we do have these. Unfortunately, they're all size small, but they're cool T-shirts. So if you know someone who can fit a size small, we've got a bunch of those to give away. Okay. So what we were thinking is if you want to pop your answers to the questions in the chat, we'll get the top people who get as many answers. Each of the sessions is going to have some questions, and we should have enough T-shirts. So buddies, flip back to that. So if you want to take a look at those questions, pop your answers in, and we'll try and tally those up. We won't send them out. You'll have to come to the first event we have that's actually physical, or where we actually turn up, because we don't know when that's going to be. But don't worry, the T-shirts are not going anywhere shortly.
And Rory, there was also a Q&A around someone liking to see a demo at some point of that external identity feature. So
yeah, sure. Yeah, I'd like to actually do a session to cover a whole lot of this stuff, because it's pretty damn awesome.
Yeah,
we can definitely have a session. We can do it, you know, as part of this virtual stuff, or we can do it when we're back in the building. But yeah, definitely that's a plan that I do have.
Yeah, it feels like pretty much each one of our mini sessions can become like a full session at some stage. There is so many things that we're talking right now that I think it's going to be interesting to do that.
Okay, so just put Q1, Q2, Q3 in the chat, in the Q&A. So question 1, what Azure AD, and I covered this in the first slide, what Azure AD feature would you use to securely access cloud apps from outside your network? Question 2, secure access to on-premise apps from outside your network. And question 3, to support BYOD. Okay, so put those answers in the Q&A, and we'll have a look at them, and I can privately chat to the winners, and I'll get your email address and send you the vouchers. Cool, and back to you, buddy.
Awesome, nice one. So I think we have Dave up next, so I'll just flick over to him, and hopefully he's not on mute this time.
Nah.
There he goes.
Paid my school fees.
Nice.
Cool. Hey guys, I'm Dave. You can catch me on Twitter. Feel free to ask any questions. Happy to sort of talk through stuff. Enjoy hearing from people. So yep, get in touch. Today I'm going to do a little bit on Microsoft's announcement that they are introducing a new data center to New Zealand. Basically putting NZ on the Azure map, as I've kind of titled it. So this is really awesome news and super exciting. The announcement was kind of out of the blue a little bit for me. I'm not sure if people on the inside track knew that it was coming either. And subsequent to the announcement, it was kind of radio silence. So there hasn't been a lot more information released other than what was initially sort of talked about, and then some sort of opinion pieces in various newspapers and digital outlets. But let's cover off what we know. So obviously the introduction of a data center into New Zealand means that customers will have access to the usual services that we've come to know and love, that being the Azure platform, Microsoft 365, Dynamics 365, and the Power Platform. And we'll be able to use those as we do today, just in a new location. And this is a significant investment into New Zealand's digital economy. Some of the reports are saying that the cost of implementing this data center is going to be in the region of $80 to $100 million, and that's a significant investment from Microsoft. And my sort of take on that is it's kind of recognition for the way New Zealand has, us as a digital community, have sort of been driving digital transformations in a lot of the organizations. And I know that's kind of what a lot of you guys do as well. So huge kudos to that. Obviously, it comes with its, the government and industry certifications that all the other regions come with, world-class security that we've come to know and love, and Rory's kind of touched on some of the really cool features that are coming out. And one of the sort of other big pieces is relieving data sovereignty concerns. So I know for a lot of organizations, barrier to cloud adoption is, where do I store my data at rest? You may have compliance policies, privacy policies that say, your data cannot leave New Zealand's shores, or typically we store it in Australian data centers. And even then, there might be some other concerns around that, particularly with some of the newer changes to the Australian laws, which say the government can get access to your data if it's part of a terrorist investigation or something along those lines. So there's been some concerns around data sovereignty in the past, and this kind of alleviates that. So your data will be stored in New Zealand at rest, which is awesome. At this stage, we don't really know much other than it will be a new region. There is some suggestion that maybe we'll have availability zones. So availability zone basically is physical separation of data centers, or so via sort of power, networking, cooling, etc., so that you don't have a single point of failure. At this stage, we only know of one data center, but there is the possibility that we may see more in the future. And that's kind of it in terms of what we know. Obviously, we'll keep our ears to the ground and follow it quite closely because it's something of significant interest to us. But yeah, this is a really, really big step forward for New Zealand's sort of cloud adoption and digital transformation. So pretty exciting. I've got a couple of questions.
I think the questions are people answering Rory's tricky ones. Oh, but you've got some questions.
Oh, cool.
Sorry, hang on. I've misunderstood. There we go.
Cool. Thanks, Dan. Cool. So Q1, what is an availability zone? Kind of touched on it briefly. Which island does Microsoft plan to create the new data center on? And what are the 3 main cloud services being made available on the new data center? And we'll pick some winners. That's me.
Awesome. And I think there's a question of what's the name of the region going to be?
I'm taking a guess that it's going to be New Zealand North.
Yeah.
But yeah, maybe that answers question 2.
I think it might. I think you might have given the game away on that one.
Yes, I don't know if Dan or Buddy, you guys sort of know whether or not availability zones, whether or not there's going to be more than one data center to create the availability zone, or if that's just on the roadmap.
No, there will be. It is going to be an availability zone, so there'll be three data centers, which we may have just answered all of your questions. So that's fantastic. So that will give us the ability to use AZ, the features of an AZ, and
for high availability.
Yeah, which makes sense.
I heard rumors it's going to be in Waiheke.
Oh, nice. I wish it was in Waiheke.
Just throwing off the answers. If anybody is thinking of answering Auckland, it's not in Auckland. It's going to be in Waiheke, guys. Answer Waiheke.
There's the trick. Don't trust Aben. Don't trust Aben. It's gonna be under someone. Yeah, it's
under someone's desk.
Under someone's desk.
And it's really cool because it's going to be a proper region, right? It's not just one data center attached to Australia. It's going to be a proper region, as you said, then three data centers with the ability to do availability zones. So there's going to be a proper setup.
Yeah, I think it speaks to the as Dave said, speaks to the innovation that's happening here, and I think it's just going to be a really good opportunity, and we're excited. We were as excited to hear the news along with everyone else at the same time. Trust me, it was a what?
Yeah.
We're all amazed and very, very happy. Cool.
Yes, ifs going everywhere.
Yeah, unusual to see the Prime Minister get excited about Azure. That was pretty cool.
Yeah. Go then. Okay.
Cool. Alrighty. So with that, thanks, Dave. I think we have Aben next. So I'll just send you live, mate. There we go.
Hey guys, hope everyone has been keeping well and your bubble's keeping well as well, and hope to see you all in the not too distant future back in our old Microsoft building. Sorry, it's not an old Microsoft building, in our old spot, and having some drinks and pizzas with you guys. So some of my contact details if you guys ever want to get in touch with me, and we will push on to the next slide. So all the next 4 news articles that I'm bringing about has come up from the build in the last 2 days. So it's been pretty exciting. I've been falling asleep on some of the sessions because I do not come from a typical development background. So I'm like, oh shit, they've lost me there. But there were some really interesting articles, and few of them I've got up here. So the first one that I'd like to get you guys to look at is routing preference that's come about. So routing preference basically means you get to choose now how your traffic routes from between Azure and the internet. So you can choose to route traffic either via the Microsoft network or via an ISP. And in our world, we actually call it cold potato routing or hot potato routing. So cold potato routing is when you send it through the Microsoft backbone, and hot potato routing is when you send it through your ISP, basically going out through the internet. Yeah, what do they mean? So when you route your traffic via the Microsoft Global Network, traffic is delivered over one of the largest networks, as you can imagine. It's got some crazy numbers. It's 160,000 miles of fiber, and there's lots of point of presence. Point of presence is when you actually enter the network. So it's got multiple redundant lines and exceptionally high reliability and availability. So let's say, for example, what does that mean? So for example, if a user in Auckland tries to access Azure resources hosted somewhere, let's say in central US or West US or something of that sort, it then enters the Microsoft Global Network at a point of presence, let's say Australia for now, and then travels through the Microsoft network and gets to the service hosted in the US. So that means it doesn't leave the actual Microsoft network and goes through the backbone and gets to your service that you're trying to get to. The other one, which is the new route, that's the new routing choice, which is basically using the internet. So it traverses the global network. It goes out and finds the shortest route to that service that you've got enabled. So we call this a bit of a cost optimized routing offer. Basically, if a user again in Auckland tries to access something in US, it goes through the public internet, finds the closest Microsoft POP closest to your service, and then gets it. Next slide, please. So we've all heard of peering services throughout, and what's come out as a new sort of an announcement is the enhancement to the customer connectivity to Microsoft Cloud. And because Microsoft Cloud hosts Office 365, Dynamics, and other software service, Azure on top of it as well. What happens is that Microsoft is tying up with multiple internet ISPs, service providers, internet exchanges, and software-defined interconnect providers like your megaports and stuff like that. And what's happening is that, let's say Auckland has an internet exchange. So once you connect into one of those peers, you're able to, again, piggyback off the Microsoft peering directly into your closest Azure data center. Now, this is slightly different from your express route and your site-to-site VPN, because your express route and site-to-site VPN is basically you building a dedicated pipe between your edge device and Azure circuit. Whereas this one, you end up at one of these exchanges or the ISPs, and they put you on a fast route towards the data center. So it's really good for if you want to optimize your network hops and things like that, so you don't have too many hops before you get to the Microsoft Cloud. Also, one cool thing is from a security perspective, you can set up analytics and statistics for events on BGP for anomalies. So you can actually check if your sessions are being hijacked or if you're actually having the best route forward and things like that. So take a look at Azure peering service and how it could actually benefit you in leveraging your service. So the next slide, please. The next slide.
Just quickly, Aben, there's a question around, are there any scenarios in which a customer would choose to go over the ISP instead of the Microsoft Global Network?
Sorry, I'm just trying to get hold of the question. What was that?
Is there any scenarios in which the customer would choose to go over the ISP instead of the Microsoft backbone?
Instead of the Microsoft backbone, Yes, one is there is a cost factor involved in jumping on the cold potato routing that we call, which is using the Microsoft backbone. So the hot potato, which is the ISP-oriented route, is you're not paying for any ingress cost when you're trying to access the Azure network and things like that. So that's one cost could be one of the reasons, and the other one could be you're having some sort of public-facing service hosted within Azure that others are consuming and things like that. That's another reason why you would use some sort of an ISP-based route instead of using the Microsoft backbone. However, if you have resources split across multiple regions, like globally between regions, and they all just need to intercommunicate between them, then you could potentially look at leveraging services like this. I once had a customer who had Dynamics 365 and a few other services hosted on Azure, and then they could leverage the sort of backbone sort of communication so that the traffic doesn't go out of the internet.
Awesome, nice one, thanks.
Cool. So the next one is pretty exciting because every time I rebuild my computer, one of the first tasks that I do now is Visual Studio and redeploying all my extensions and things like that. I tend to forget redeploying some extension, and then I'm left wondering what was that theme or what was that extension that I used to use on the last build of my laptop. But what happens now is that you can actually use Visual Studio Code within your browser. So it's called Visual Studio Code Spaces. And basically, it's a fully configured development environment if you look at it, and it's pretty much fired up in few minutes. You can work on it continuously for long-term or short-term projects and things like that. But one cool feature, I don't know if you guys can see the me installing the extensions. When you install something like Azure Tools and things like that, now it installs the extension pack, which is the rest of the other two extensions that you can use as well. So you don't have to go and dig around for other extensions. Also, it saves your sessions, it saves your files and things like that. Think of it like your personal VM, which has Visual Studio built into it. So if you're having trouble working from different operating systems and want to share that experience between different laptops and things like that, I think this is a cool feature, just firing up a browser and being able to use Visual Studio Code in one single place and things like that. And it has all the other supports, Git and Visual Studio. Sorry, Dan?
Yeah, I was going to say, how does this differ to Visual Studio Online that was announced? I think, was it Ignite?
I think it's pretty much the same thing, and it's just been renamed to Visual Studio Code Spaces. The funniest thing was, if you go to GitHub, there's GitHub Code Spaces as well, and it's just Visual Studio Code, but with a white theme in it. It's not dark. It doesn't look Azure. It doesn't look Microsofty. It looks GitHub. It's got the GitHub theme to it. But check out GitHub Code Spaces as well. Pretty much the same thing. Has more integration with GitHub and things like that.
Yeah, because I noticed the URL's online.visualstudio.com, and I think VS. And if anyone remembers, Visual Studio Online was the early name of Azure DevOps, or one of the earlier names. They had multiple ones.
Yeah, and so you can have multiple instances of this. So if you're working across different teams and things like that, you can do your share, Visual Studio share, and all this stuff along with other members of your team. Right, and over to the last exciting news. Microsoft is building a supercomputer within Azure. Now, what does that mean? Well, basically what it means is that Microsoft has publicly disclosed now that they've built a small computer, if you may look at it that way. It's just got 285,000 CPU cores, a truckload of GPUs attached to it, and by the OpenAI, the supercomputer. I forgot the organization that actually ranks supercomputers. They've ranked this supercomputer within Azure in the top 5. So that's a big marketing one, for a big win for Microsoft and Azure, I guess. So it's built in collaboration with an organization called as OpenAI. So And one of the objectives, I guess, is to help it train and use or calculate against large AI models and stuff like that. So think of a future where you're able to tap into that sort of power through your Azure portal. So you don't have to check your bank balance if you can afford a supercomputer. You can actually go into the Azure portal and be able to interact with it. I'm pretty sure they're not going to give you, okay, let's fire up another instance of the supercomputer, but I'm sure you're going to be able to interact with it. Maybe publish your AI models and get it to crunch it up and give you back results and stuff like that. So that being said, that's the end of my session.
So Aben, I would say, so we're not building Skynet, right? This is not Microsoft Skynet, is it?
I have started a PowerShell script, and it's called Skynet.ps1. I'm planning on running it within this tenancy. See, this is, think of it like, you want to crunch numbers to check permutations of different variations of a drug being tested. The amount of compute and the power that goes into compute that sort of calculations, if clients or customers can leverage that on a demand basis, that just changes the ball game quite a bit, especially small weather companies, or you're building an application that uses weather-based calculations and stuff like that. The amount of permutations and different calculations that has to go in. I think it's quite an exciting news to have access to such capabilities. So that's pretty much it from me, guys. I unfortunately forgot to do my questions slide, so I'll take any questions right at the end, or if there's any swags remaining, I'll come up with some questions for the audience to answer. Otherwise, it's over to Ragnar.
Hello, everyone. So we're going to be talking about Azure integration and what is the news that we found there. Just a little bit about me. My name is Wagner Silveira. I'm the Principal Integration Architect at Tita and Azure MVP. If you wanted to get in touch with me, you can get to my email, wagner.silveira@tita.co.nz, or come to post anything on Twitter, WSilveiraNZ, and you can also find me on LinkedIn on /Wagner Silveira. But can you get the next slide? First news from Build, Logic Apps loves Azure Functions. Everyone knows that, and we have that from a long time, right? We already knew that. But what is the deal with that? Now we're going to have functions and logic apps sharing the function runtime, right? That means that logic apps and functions are going to coexist as a function apps. It will be able to run locally, which means that it's going to open a whole lot of different scenarios with that. And some of the connectors from logic apps are also going to be able to connect directly to on-prem services like SQL Server and other things. Why that's big news? Because now we're going to be enable multi-cloud, edge, and on-prem kind of scenarios, right? We're doing that today with functions, where you can actually get functions run locally, run on Kubernetes, which means that you can run on other clouds, so you can run on edge devices. Soon, the same kind of thing is going to be able to help with logic apps. It's going to provide a whole lot of different options for deployments, right, because of that. And most of the time, when using logic apps and you needed to extend logic apps to what I couldn't do out of the box, the first port of call was extending that with some functions. So now you can have like functions app that encapsulates your workflows and your utilities that support that workflow as one unit of deployment. Okay, so some big news. That is not available in preview yet, and private preview is going to be opening soon, so that have your eyes peeled with the product group to get into the private preview if you're interested on that. And when it's public preview, we're probably going to be doing some more announcements. Next one. Logic Apps does not just love functions, it also loves Visual Studio Code. On the same announcements that we see that they running on functions runtime, we also found that running a whole new VS Code extension. And that new VS Code extension now is going to give you full design experience locally, right? So inside of VS Code, if you're working with Logic Apps today, you can visualize the function or the Logic Apps, but you cannot edit that. With this new experience, you'll be able to not just visualize, but you're able to edit the design experience there. And that was also, that Visual Studio Code extension also going to give you a new packaging experience, improving the DevOps and the CI/CD, because it's going to be piggyback on the functions runtime. All right. Why this is big from my point of view? Because now it's going to make Logic Apps a first-class citizen, not just on the integration circles, but also on development world, right? So now there is no more excuses. I'm not an integration developer. I'm not going to be using Logic Apps to expand something, because they're going to be working really well together with functions. That is core part of development, and it's going to be working really well on Visual Studio Code, that today is also core part of development. So good time to jump into Logic Apps. Next one. API Management Self-Host Gateway is GA. I think some of you guys might remember that back last year, I was doing some news from Ignite, and one of the things that we have there was that API Management Arc Enable, that we called at that time, was in preview, right? What was that? Was having an API Gateway container with a set of curated APIs that you select to run on that container, running on multi-cloud, on Edge, on-prem. That now is graduated to GA. So you should be able to use that. It's going to be available on the Dev and the Premium tiers, like it was on preview, so there is no changes on that. And the container that hosts the API gateway is now available to support both Docker and Kubernetes deployment. Why this is a big news? Because it's going to bring those APIs closer to the backend, right? One of the big issues that we had before with API management running on-premises or other cloud APIs as the backend, it was kind of the idea of this slingshot approach, where you are on-prem, try to connect to that API that is sitting next to you on-prem, but you have to go up to the cloud and back to access that. With this, now you can bring that experience close to the user. That's going to improve security, because you might not need to open ports to going out and back, and is also going to improve performance, because now you're going to be working just inside your perimeter. Next one. API management also loves Visual Studio Code, right? You can see that build was like a love fest. Everyone loves Visual Studio Code. What we have on the API management, we already had a code extension for that, but they improving that code extension. And that experience now give you full access to API management instance, so you can see all the APIs, all the products, all the name values inside that instance, right? It gives you full support for policy development, so you can open a policy at any level, global, product, API, or operation, make your changes that and upload directly to the API management instance that you're managing. It gives you new testing capabilities. You can right-click on an API operation and then say test. It's going to open the rest of the client inside Visual Studio Code, give you all the hints for what you needed to provide to make that API operation run, and see the result inside Visual Studio Code. So you don't need to leave Visual Studio Code for anything. Policy debugging is going to be coming soon. So you'll not only be able to test, but you'll be able to put a breakpoint inside a policy and find out why it's not working. And finally, is integrated with API Management DevOps Kit that was launched sometime last year. That means that once you have all the API working the way that you want, you can export that as a set of farm templates and publish that into your source code to work inside your CI/CD pipeline. Apart from the debugging functionality, everything else is already available on the latest version of the Visual Studio Code extension today, so you should be able to be using that now. Why this is a big news? From my point of view, is an improved dev experience now, just like what we wanted to see later on Logic Apps. You don't need to leave Visual Studio Code now to implement it or to code API management, right? Before you have to go to the portal, do a whole lot of stuff there, export things back, and then publish. Now we can do everything from the same IDE. And that means that all those tools are converging to a single IDE. You're going to have Logic Apps on that IDE, you're going to have API management, you're going to have functions. And with that is all the 3 items that you needed to implement workflows, because the event grids and a service bus are going to give you the reaction to those things that you need to code. Next one. Talking about Service Bus Explorer is now in preview, right? So what is the deal with that? Before, if you wanted to see the messages that were in a queue and have a peek on that, or send a new message to a queue to test or to a topic or a subscription, you would be able to do that inside the portal. What you needed to do was get another application that, funnily enough, was called Service Bus Explorer, created by the community, install that, and then connect to your Service Bus queues and topics. Now you have all of that lit up inside the portal, so one place to go, right? You allow message to be sent, to be received, and to be picked. Oh. Remember one thing that is quite important: receive is destructive, right? So it's a minute. I'm in a presentation. Sorry, guys. We have someone else here. You can say hi, and you can disappear.
Hi.
Now, bye-bye. Sorry. So what we can do is, as I was saying, receive is a destructive action.
Hey, Dad, when do you finish?
Go in half an hour.
Half an hour?
Yeah.
What? So you finished that.
Now continue with the program. Receive is destructive, right? You can see like it was just the kid getting into the room. It destructs everything. If you actually use the receive, you're taking the message from the queue. And what that means is you're not going to have that anymore. If you wanted to just take a look at the message, you can use pick. And the other thing that is quite important on that one is the subscription filters that you have no way to understand what is there. Now you can actually see all the filter information. You can create and you can edit all from everything from the portal, right? So again, is a very improved dev experience. You didn't have all the access to that before. You can have improved support experience because before we have to install something else to your support team to understand what is happening on Service Bus. You have less external dependencies, and you have everything on the same single pane of glass. Next one.
Oh, sorry.
Yep. So another news on Service Bus is that Service Bus Private Link is also GA. I'm not going to talk too much about that one because then it's going to be covering Private Link in more details. But basically, now we're going to have a private endpoint for your Service Bus that is available on the virtual network and is addressable with a local IP, right? Instead of just connecting to the network, but still addressable to the public IP, which was service endpoints were before. So that is going to improve security for hybrid integration because you're not going to be required to open access to public. Before, what we did was the opposite. You say to your service bus on the public region that it can only be accessed by those items on the network. Now you're actually bringing the service bus to the virtual network to a point, right? And there is no requirement for public traffic at this point. Next one. Event Grid's top partner topics is now in preview. What is that? Is the ability to have third-party or SaaS applications to create event sources and to be surfaced through Event Grid. So you have like a tightly coupled, not tightly coupled is not the good name, but a couple connection between third-party sources and Event Grids without you having to create custom events as an application developer. An example of that is OAuth. That is the first partner to enable that functionality, right? And from what I see, there is an onboarding process that is available. So if you have a SaaS application or an application that you wanted to create as a partner topic, you should be able to go through that onboarding process and having that running. That opens a huge possibilities for real-time integration from SaaS applications, right? Because now they can start emitting all the events that they already have into Event Grid, and that is going to simplify implementation of connectors or for other type of integrations. It's already out of the box, and you can just surface that through Event Grid. Next one. Event Grid topics now have the ability to use system managed identity, right? So you can have a managed identity associated to your Event Grid topic. That means that permissions into other applications, to publish into other applications, can be done via RBAC instead of using keys. For example, you can get and give permission to event publisher to Event Grids for that service Event Grid topic MSI, and you don't need to have the keys for that anymore because you're already having the integration there. That same thing for service bus, blob storage, and queue storage. That is the first destinations that are available. What is important on that is improved security, right? Because you don't have keys floating on your deployment or anything. It's just RBAC on the Azure Fabric itself, which means there is also a much simpler deployment. You don't have to get this and manage using keys. You just making sure that the MSIs are implemented and that the RBAC is set up, and that's it. Next. Cool. So we come down to the 3 questions. First of all, the first question is, what 2 technologies Logic Apps love? Right, we talked about that at the beginning. The second question that is really the simple. What API management tier supports self-hosted gateways? And the final one is actually can reply to true or false to that, right? So also really simple. A message will stay in the queue when you use the receive on the new Service Bus Explorer, right? And that's me.
Awesome, Wagner.
Thank you for having me and my kid on the presentation.
Famous. Hey, that Logic App stuff is really exciting.
And it is.
It obviously functions. You know, the functions runtime is open source. It's out there on GitHub. Do you think they're going to do a similar thing with Logic Apps? The Logic Apps runtime will be brought into functions, and they'll open source that as well.
I hope so. I think that from what I understand, what they're doing is actually making sure that the Logic Apps is actually going to be running on the function runtime, right? It's going to be kind of almost converted to a Logic App, to a function in some sense. So they're going to get really close. And the other thing that is going to bring to us is, from what I understand so far, they're actually going to be using some of the triggers from functions. Some of the bindings from functions. That means that's like some triggers might be able to be written as bindings for functions. And with that, you have like open even more the ability to create custom connectors or to create new connectors that we didn't have before, right? So that is probably going to mushroom.
Oh, that sounds pretty. It sounds like a pretty good time to be using either of them.
Mm-hmm.
So
Or
does
both.
that means Logic Apps, you will be potentially able to use that inside a Kubernetes cluster with, say, the KEDA, the Kubernetes event-driven architecture, providing, performing scaling and that sort of thing.
Exactly. It's like the possibilities on that, if they end up implementing that the way that I'm envisioning, that is wrapping everything around the function, you're going to have that running locally, right? So you have control, and then finally you have the ability to create like a proper workflows on-prem that is not requiring huge middleware like with Beanstalk server and things like that. So you can really invest as your pace. You have a really easy story to migrate that to Azure. And if Azure is not your cup of tea, you can still use that and push to other clouds or push to Kubernetes in other places. So the story there is going to be fantastic.
That's awesome. That's fantastic. That sounds really, really cool. I'm looking forward to seeing that. Okay, hopefully we're getting a few people answering those questions. Hopefully, yeah, otherwise we're going to have to answer them and claim the t-shirts, but yeah, won't fit me. Okay, so yep, I'm Dan. I'm a cloud solution architect over at Microsoft. We'll just jump straight into it. Look, there was so much good stuff coming out of Build. I know it's kind of hard to choose your favorite stuff, so I've just picked the stuff that I thought was coolest, or that I really, that happens to be something that I look at day in, day out, and was going to really make a big difference to me. So obviously ARM templates, which is Microsoft's first class infrastructure as code definition language, that's been constantly evolving and constantly improving. There was a huge number of features that were announced in Ignite last year, but the challenge there, they were only announced, they weren't available, but now at Build they made them available. So the biggest, well, the first one here is the Visual Studio Code ARM tool. So obviously, again, if you're using Visual Studio Code, those Azure Resource Manager tools have all had a bit of an overhaul. There's a whole lot of new features in there. The linting, all that sort of stuff is just got even better. So if you're doing anything to do with Azure Resource Manager templates, you should be using Visual Studio Code because that extension is just so powerful. And of course, with what Aben demonstrated with Visual Studio Online, you just chuck your Visual Studio Online code spaces. You should just chuck that extension over there and be set up there. The second thing, obviously, if you're in the DevOps space, if you're doing a lot of infrastructure as code, if you're automating deployments, there's this thing called the ARM TTK, which is the template toolkit. Basically, it allows you to unit test your ARM templates. So it's amazing to put that in your DevOps pipeline. So when someone checks in their template, it'll run these unit tests, do some validation to make sure that that template's valid. And this is not just syntax validation, it's doing a whole lot of best practice validation and all sorts of other stuff. You can also extend it and build out your own unit tests to make sure various things don't happen. So that can be really powerful, especially if you're letting your development teams build their ARM templates and they're sticking them in a pipeline, sticking them in a Git repo and pushing that. The third thing, this was announced at Ignite. So this was the deployment script resource. That's now GA. So the deployment script resource is just a resource in your ARM template, another resource type that allows you to run some PowerShell code or Bash scripts. And it's used for doing the last mile of a deployment. So say you've got an Azure, an ARM template that deploys a couple of VMs, puts a load balancer in, sticks some storage accounts in. You might want to configure, do some additional configuration on those VMs. You might want to go off and register some software for a third party and get a license key and push that out there. This is where you can do that. So you can run PowerShell scripts, write them straight in line in the ARM template, or you can put those PowerShell scripts or Bash scripts in a storage account and just reference it there. But it also supports parameterization, and you can get the output of those scripts and make decisions in your ARM template. So that's now GA. So that's pretty cool. That'll give you more of an ability to do everything you need in a deployment. And then finally is what if. What if you're from the Terraform world, if you're familiar with that, there's the Terraform plan command. What that would do is it would take a look at what you're trying to deploy, your ARM template, or in Terraform's case, your TF files. It would take a look at that definition and compare it with what's actually deployed in your environment. And if there's any differences, the command will report back and say, here's all the things that are different, and here's the things I'm going to change if you run me for real. So this gives you a way to sort of pre-validate that when you go and do a deployment, it's going to do the things you expect it to do. It's not going to, you're not going to get a surprise and it's going to deploy, 50 extremely expensive N-series VMs or something like that. And it's got a bit of AI behind it, because one of the things that the feedback that the team got was, you're telling us about stuff that's not really it doesn't actually matter. I've changed the title of this description here. That doesn't matter. Just ignore that. So they've done a lot of work in that space, and now there's a bit of AI which makes intelligent decisions about what it should tell you about.
That's awesome.
So that's going to be that's going to be pretty game changing. And especially if you're from Terraform, you've probably been using this forever. So it's just Microsoft catching up. The big difference, though, I think the difference between if you look at Terraform plan versus ARM templates is Terraform plan, it basically it needs to go to the Azure Resource Manager APIs and retrieve what the current state is, and that can take a little bit longer than when you submit the what if. So when you're doing a what if, you're actually submitting the ARM template to the ARM engine via an API, the what if API, and that will then do all the evaluation closer to the actual the resources themselves, or the metadata that defines those resources. So it can be done quite quickly. It takes between 10 and 20 seconds usually.
So Dan, it has no significance like the Terraform state file. It doesn't do any of that sort of.
No.
It doesn't read the state file. Okay, cool.
Correct. So that's the difference. The Terraform, of course, when you usually maintain a state file locally, which defines that environment or representation of your environment to help speed that up. But either way, it's good to see that catching up. And then there was 2 features that were announced, which was pretty cool. So template specs is a new resource that allows you to define an ARM template and basically stick that in a library inside your Azure environment as another type of resource. You can then use that template in other ARM templates. So it becomes your script, your ARM library. There used to sort of be similar features, the library feature, if you're familiar with that, in the portal. This is much better in that it supports versioning. It's all CLI and API driven. So, Aben might go, okay, I've got my Git pipeline. I'm the guy who defines all the ARM templates for our company. He'll go and push that ARM template as a template spec and make it available to everyone. Someone says, hey, look, can we add this feature to it? You can add that feature, push that and release that at version 1.01. And then you've got the ability to roll back and all that sort of stuff. So that's really good. It's going to apparently work with Lighthouse. So if you're a CS, if you're a CSP and you're looking after lots of tenant environments, you'll be able to have your library of ARM templates you use with all your customers you look after. So that's going to be pretty cool. There's a new ARM template format announced. This is probably my favorite thing of all. I hate JSON. It is not a good decorative language. It's not a language. It's just not very good for ARM templates. Everyone knows that. They're not readable. They're quite hard to maintain. So they've announced they're going to release a new template format. The old JSON one's going to stay compatible, and this is going to be this new one's going to be compatible. It's not YAML. They've said, look, it's not going to be YAML based because that's not that good either. It's going to be some meta language, but that should hopefully make editing JSON files a lot more fun, because I think that's probably the most painful part is the JSON format. So that's been announced. We haven't got a time on that, but we should hopefully see something in the not too distant future. Kubernetes, I'm going to rush through these in the absence of time. Kubernetes, of course, is, everyone loves Kubernetes. There's so much stuff happening in that space. It's just almost impossible to keep on top of. But some of the big announcements, of course, is Windows Containers GA. Previously, you could, with your Kubernetes clusters, you could run Linux workloads as the primary nodes, and you could run Windows, but those node types weren't GA. So those are now GA, so you can get support for running Windows containers in your Windows node pools. Thing to remember about Kubernetes is you can support a single Kubernetes cluster can support multiple node pools, and those node pools can be different types. So you can just have a single cluster running both Linux and Windows node pools in that cluster, so you can run both workloads, which is pretty cool. The other thing is private clusters went GA. So that you've always sort of had the nodes able to be in private VNets, right? The Kubernetes cluster is made up of the master and the nodes. The nodes have always been able to be private, but the problem was you couldn't make that control plane, that API control plane that Kubernetes uses, that couldn't be made private, and that was a bit of a problem for a lot of people. So now they've been able to do this. Now we actually earlier in the year when I was in Seattle, that the engineering team took us through the amount of work they had to do to get this to work, and it's quite impressive what they did and how they did it and how they got all this to work. Because Kubernetes itself has a huge amount of dependencies out on the internet and being able to access the internet. So there was just a lot of challenges they had to overcome. So that's gonna open up Kubernetes to be used in a lot more scenarios. Azure Advisor support. So now if you use Azure Advisor, which you probably all should be, it'll give you Kubernetes best practices recommendations in there. Talk about your node types and how you might increase security and reduce costs. So take a look at that if you're using Kubernetes. The application gateway ingress controller for AKS, this is the diagram on the right. This was actually released pre-build. This was a little while ago, but it's sort of slipped under the radar, and it's amazingly powerful. With Kubernetes, you typically want to have an ingress controller of some kind that really controls and routes traffic coming into your cluster to the appropriate pods. Normally, you're going to use, say, something like an Nginx ingress controller, which is fantastic and it works really well. But if you've got an Azure application gateway, what you can now do is you can have this Azure application gateway controller that sits in your cluster, and it will allow your AKS cluster, the deployment manifests and so on, to control the rules and routes in your app gateway. So if you bring on you deploy a new set of pods, that's a new version of your website, those pods can automatically go out and configure that application gateway with an ingress rule to make sure traffic is routed in to the appropriate pods. So you don't need that Nginx ingress controller. You'd still use it, but it just gives you another option. So that was pretty cool. Then finally, you've got Azure Policy for AKS. So Azure Policy is something that allows you to define policies that govern how your Azure environment is used. Hey, you're not allowed to deploy these types of VMs, or if you deploy a storage account, it's got to have SSL enabled. Well, now you can actually do Azure Policy for the things like your pods and namespaces and your ingress controllers inside your cluster. So you can actually apply policies that says, hey, look, this, we're not allowed to deploy into this namespace, or you can't deploy pods with more than this amount of memory assigned. So you can really get a little bit, start to use policy, and the policy, of course, can be audit or deny. So you might just audit what clusters are doing and what they look like, and whether people are violating policy. So that's pretty cool. It gives you, gives your security people a little bit more visibility and control over what's going on in the environment. Cosmos DB. So yeah, Cosmos DB is one of those things that a lot of people aren't using on the surface, and then the more I dig in, the more I realize how many people are using it. So I thought that was worth calling out. So first thing is, a free tier has been announced. This is Cosmos DB is awesome, very unbelievably powerful and scalable, but easy to misuse. And having the free tier will allow more people to just get in and see what it's all about, figure out how to use it and what sort of use cases it's for, and just for the simple small, for small projects where you don't need a lot of, you're not using a lot of it, it can be amazingly powerful. So that's going to be fantastic. So Jupyter Notebooks, if you're not familiar with Jupyter Notebooks, it's a way of combining code and documentation together in a sort of notebook form. Those notebooks are available in Cosmos DB, but you can now put C# in there. And as I'm I'm quite fond of C#. I'm better at C# than Python. It's fantastic. I can go write C# code straight in there. I can push that straight, have code running straight against my Cosmos DB, which is awesome. Probably the biggest announcement was autoscale. Previously, there was no autoscale in Cosmos DB. You said, I want this amount of provision throughput, and you were stuck with it. You could write your own manual scale mechanism, which would, you could scale on a timer, or you could make decisions yourself, but that was always a bit of work. Now you can basically set your max RUs, and the Cosmos DB will scale automatically for you. It'll scale down to a minimum of 10% of your whatever you set your maximum to. So that's an immediate way of reducing the cost if you're using Cosmos DB. Couple of other things, they announced a serverless tier, which is going to be a pure consumption model. With Cosmos, you're paying for reserved capacity. You reserve a certain amount of capacity, which is measured in resource request units. Now you can just go and say, look, I want to pay for what I use. So that's just been announced. That's not released yet, but it's going to be great for small to medium and spiky workloads. We'll talk about the private link in a minute, but there's a whole bunch of other stuff like custom and encrypted keys, the full fidelity change feed. If you're an integration specialist, you're probably aware that the change feed for Cosmos only did updates and inserts. Now it will actually operate on deletes as well, which is quite cool. And they've also announced point-in-time recovery, which is going to be really good. And then finally, just one other announcement. It didn't really fit anywhere else. So WinGet, we've all been talking about this. If your WinGet is a package manager for Windows, this has been a very early alpha's been released. It's sort of like apt-get, kind of like Yum, maybe like Brew if you're on Mac. It allows you to install software from the command line. If you've been using Chocolatey, you'll be absolutely familiar with WinGet. It's very early beta. It's going to be promising because it's going to come inbox, which just means obviously provisioning your machines are going to be a little bit easier. It'll be a bit of fun. So I highly recommend going over and checking it out, giving them some feedback. Okay, private link. So just a bit of background. Private link has, over the last 6 to 9 months, Microsoft's been doing quite a real push to make services, give PaaS services the ability to be put inside VNets. The first attempts were things like service endpoints, and if you've ever used a service endpoint, I think Wagner was mentioning them before. Service endpoint sort of simulated being able to attach a PaaS service to a VNet, but it never really was attached. That traffic was still going though over the public internet. It was just that that particular PaaS service would automatically allow traffic to come from that VNet, but it was still traversing the public internet. This didn't always make security people that happy, that comfortable. It was usually still encrypted, but it was just one of those things that were going, well, look, if we could put this service, attach this service to a virtual network, so that it has an IP address in the virtual network, and so that traffic going to that service stays within the virtual network, that's just going to make us a lot happier, and you're going to make your own life a lot bit easier to do this. So over the past 9 months, Microsoft's been working extremely hard to make this happen. You'll have seen more and more services being lit up with private link. They announced a whole bunch more at Build, and as Wagner said, service, I think it was Service Bus was one of them. But the big benefits were, that you get private access from PaaS services in a VNet, but it allows you to say, look, I've got an express route connecting my on-premise network to Azure, and I'm running this website, this Azure Web Apps or a Service Bus out here in Azure. I want to be able to use my express route to send traffic to and from that. It might not be for security purposes. It might be just, well, I've got this big, fast, guaranteed link. I don't want to use the internet for that. So that's another reason why these private links are getting a lot of attention. And then the third reason really is data leakage protection. So obviously it's not likely that this is going to happen, but being able to isolate and make sure that traffic is only traversing from point to point and not over the public internet does sort of effectively eliminate that possibility. There is one other thing, and there's the ability, private link actually allows you to extend, if you've got an application you've built, a virtual network with a load balancer, you can actually now extend that application to another tenant. So say you build an application in your tenant, you can now extend your service into your customer's tenant. They can then pair their virtual network or connect their virtual network to your service. So you can actually build PaaS services yourself. Now that's from an ISV, or if you're a CSP, those sorts of things that can open up a lot of doors for you. So that's pretty cool. But just for a quick list of all the private link services, or the service resources that have been lit up with private link, this is a half of the list, but the ones that came out really over Build was the Azure Cosmos DB, the Kubernetes API, the Key Vault one as well. There's a bunch of others. Some of these are not, but and the big one for me, and this came out a little bit before Build, was Azure Web Apps. So Azure Web Apps is actually one of the harder ones, because with an Azure Web App, you have both a front end and a back end. Now, you've always been able to put the back end in a virtual network. There was two methods. There was VPN and regional peering, but that was only the back end. So that means, you could have a web app that's connecting to an on-premise SQL database, and that would be going over the private internet. But now you can put the front end in the internet on a VNet. So that means you can now put a gateway in front of it, and then put that use the WAF feature to ensure that front end, all that traffic from that app gateway is being encrypted, staying within the virtual network, and getting to that web app, which you've never been able to do. And that, from a PCI compliance, is actually really, really big. So that's going to be really useful. So I won't go into too much detail about the ins and outs of private endpoints and that sort of stuff, but I would just point out one of the things I see a lot of people using private link at the moment. Everyone's getting it. Everyone's going, oh, this is available, I'm going to do it. But I've seen a lot of people make a few basic mistakes, and I think it's worth pointing out. These are the pointers around what to not do. You have to override your DNS. When you have a private link endpoint, a new FQDN and IP address is going to be assigned, private IP address and private FQDN is going to be assigned to that private link service. So if you're using Cosmos DB, or say you're using App Service, it's going to be private. myapp.privatelink.azurewebsites.net. But that is a private FQDN and a private IP address. If you try and use the public one, your application will fail because it is blocked. And we see that time and time again. You've got to use either the private DNS, or what you want to do is override the DNS with a private zone inside your VNet. So that's just a first tip. If you take anything away from the private link conversation, remember that. Okay, that's me. Just one other thing. There was a whole bunch of digital swag given away at Build 2020. So this was images and all sorts of stuff. If you want to go claim that, it's over on a GitHub resource. Here's repo. There's the URL. You can go. There's all sorts of fancy, shiny digital content there. Go have a look. It's quite a large collection. Okay, and then I have my questions. But while you're having a look at those, there's one question come up around: can private link replace app service environment, as the primary purpose of ASE was to have isolated, secure environment for app services? That's a good question, and the answer is yes and no. Okay, if you're using app service environment to isolate, to guarantee an isolation of your app service, to say, look, the compute that runs my app service is not shared by anyone else. If you're using that app service environment for that, then no, private link will not solve that problem, because private link is just guaranteeing that the network traffic that is hitting your app service has come in from the VNet only. But if you're using app service environment because you wanted to guarantee, you wanted to make sure that traffic is only getting, coming from your app gateway, traversing a private network, and then hitting that app service directly. If you're using it for that, then yes, you can now move away from using app service environment. And that will save you so much money. A lot of money.
Thousands,
tens of thousands. App service environment was very expensive. So yeah, those are my questions. So if you want to win some stuff, I hope they're pretty easy, but yeah. And over to you, buddy.
Nice, awesome. Yeah, wicked. I think that was a pretty good success. No technical difficulties other than a few people just leaving themselves on mute. Yeah, for all of those that have kind of been and gone, thanks for jumping in. Like I say, it's good to be back. I think we'll improve on this, and on that, there's just a link up on the screen at the minute, just around that'll take you to a feedback form, a Microsoft Forms form. So if you could just spend a couple of minutes filling it out, it would be greatly appreciated by all of us, just so that we can work out what you liked, what you didn't like, and also get a bit of insight into some of the content that you want to see over the next few sessions. And we'll be getting together probably over the next week or so, and we'll go through that stuff and work out when the next session is going to be, what it's going to consist of, and who's going to be presenting and talking. And we'll post it up on all the normal channels, so that you guys can register your interest, and we'll be back again.
Awesome. Thanks everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for coming.
I just published the bit.ly address on the Q&A, so you guys can click straight from there.
Oh, awesome. We'll share the slides as well. Where are we going to share the slides?
Won't they be on the recording?
Yes. So some people want, although some people might want this. We'll figure it out. And we'll make sure that we post them somewhere.
You can put a link. You can put a link on the Meetup at event.
Yeah, Meetup.
Yeah,
upload it
awesome.
to Meetup.
Yeah, we'll pick a location and we'll post it on Twitter and on the Meetup, and then take it from there.
Cool.
Nice
there
one.
we go. And we've got some answers to the questions which are correct. So awesome.
Hey, Richard, good on you.
Good on you. Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Cool.
See you next
Nice
time.
one.
See ya.
Thanks, guys.